Good evening to everyone. I hope you're all doing well. At least, well enough. Tonight will probably be a shorter visiting period, but I will read for as long as I feel comfortable. Tonight, I have for you one of our best writers' story to read, and as well, a new writer. Also, soon I will be working with a writer to produce a series of stories. I'll let you know more after I have brought the writer to join us here at the asylum. I hope you enjoy tonight's stories, or at least they give you that thrill you so desperately need. For now, it is time to begin. I am your host, Beyond 5150, and as I'm sure you are aware, this is my asylum. You may have been brought here against your will, or you may have entered willingly. But now, you cannot leave, for I am the master of misery, your sovereign of the spine-tingling, your purveyor of the petrifying, and here I am your god of all things horrifying. You will likely hear things you will wish was never spoken, things you have never heard. Try as you might, you won't find your happy place. Now, it's time to release the terror I have gathered for you tonight. Sit back, relax, and await for the power of these horrors to twist you into my subservience. Tonight, we're going to be starting with a new author. This is by Cal_Ness. He also has a Reddit page that is placed in the description. He's writing a series, essentially, and in the description I've made sure to place the location on the Reddit page. It's r/WestCoastDerry, and it's in relation to a series of stories he's been writing. You can also locate him in the link for his Reddit user submitted page to read any of his stories. Be sure to make sure you let these authors know how much you appreciate their stories. Because how else am I going to find people to fill my asylum? This story is titled A Different Kind of Darkness. It's a multi-stage story, so the author has also placed a note that this story contains strong graphic violence. Now, I'm sure being here with us, you've experienced some of that yourself, so or you understand it or enjoy it. It all depends if you're here as a visitor or as a patient. Either way, let's get started. Again, this is titled A Different Kind of Darkness by Cal_Ness. We got the call at 7:30. When I saw it, it was directly from the top, straight from the boss. I knew that shit had hit the fan. Mike, my coworker, best friend, closest confidant, had driven us to grab Starbucks. We were on our way to shake down a few nobodies whose accounts were, well, past due. "Please, come as soon as possible, Charles," said the boss in his instantly recognizable Spanish accent. He rolled his R's delicately, like a poet courting a starry-eyed lover. He was also the only person who called me Charles. Everyone else just calls me Charlie. "Butcher and Gretchen are already here," the boss finished. "We need you right away." Mike pulled out of the drive-thru over the curb and, well, we took off across town. When we got to the boss's estate, I noticed there were more cars than usual. "Something's up," said Mike. "It's like a fucking car lot." "Yeah, pull around. We'll go through the kitchen." Mike parked. We hopped out, making our way down the garden path toward the kitchen in the back, avoiding the boss's perfectly manicured grass. The perfume rolling off his wife's flower garden was thick and intoxicating. We walked into the kitchen, poured ourselves some coffee, and made our way into the living room. I heard the boss's wife's sobs from 2 rooms away. The boss met us in the hallway, flanked by 2 of his bodyguards. He pulled me into a hug. Hugging him, it always made me feel uncomfortable. But the boss, despite his penchant for brutal violence, well, he was the touchy-feely type. "Charles," he said. I saw that his eyes were puffy from crying. "And Michael, things are not good. As you can tell, Philippa is inconsolable. Come, let's give her space." The boss ushered us towards the basement door. Covering the keypad, he punched in the code. The magnetic lock clicked open. He led us down the stairs. I heard a chorus of agonized screams. When we got to the basement, I saw that Gretchen, my manager, and Butcher, her 280-pound pit bull of a right-hand man, were waiting for us. Butcher was wearing his puffy jacket like he always did, whether we were inside or out, whether it was summertime or the dead of winter. He was a hard motherfucker. But beneath his shell, he was a softie. And more than anything, Butcher hated being cold. Both Gretchen and Butcher were looking into a room through double-thick pane glass. Inside the room, more of the boss's bodyguards were there, torturing 3 men. I noticed the men were grunts, like me. I recognized them from somewhere else, though. After a moment of connecting the dots, I realized they were the 3 in charge of watching over Marisol, the boss's daughter. One of the bodyguards pried a grunt's eyelids open, keeping him in a headlock with the other arm. Through rapidly drying eyeballs, the grunt watched as one of his colleagues had his fingers snapped off by a pair of garden shears. The fingers fell to the floor in quick succession, bones snapping like kindling, flesh flayed off like the skin on a rose stem. Bodyguards weren't trying to pry any answers out of him. This was plain torture, through and through. I knew torture when I saw it. I had been on the other side of those shears. To my knowledge, I was the only person to have ever survived one of the boss's torture sessions. It was 3 years earlier. They stopped after lopping off the pinky and ring finger of my non-shooting hand. The boss had been impressed that I'd withstood the pain, knowing that he had an undeniable talent in his hands. The guy in the room, he wasn't so lucky. He screamed like a banshee, tears squirting out of the corners of his eyes. Having inflicted as much pain as possible in the waning moments of the guy's life, the bodyguard stepped back and swept the shears across his throat, severing veins, cartilage, and setting a sheet of blood out across the room. It hit the bodyguard's vinyl apron, dripping down into the floor, coursing towards the drain. "Marisol," said the boss, unfazed by what he was seeing. "My sweet Marisol." The guy, whose eyes were being pried open by the bodyguard, was released from his headlock. And then another bodyguard came forward and covered the guy's head in plastic bag and zip-tied it around his throat, kicked over the chair. While he flopped around like an oxygen-starved fish, the bodyguards stepped over him, leaving the room without looking back. third member of the detail assigned to protecting Marisol was left bound to his chair, watching in horror as one of his co-workers bled out and the other screamed fruitlessly through the plastic bubbles surrounding his head. The boss nodded, satisfied with the progress his guards had made. When one of the torturers walked out, the boss patted him on the shoulder. "I appreciate your attention to detail," he said. "Come, join us for breakfast. Then you can finish your work." The boss led the way up the stairs. "Chiquilis," he said. "For breakfast, I mean. My chef made them with fresh tortillas. Comfort food in these trying times." 10 minutes later, I was on the boss's back porch drinking a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice and eating a plate full of salsa verde breakfast nachos. I flexed the 3 remaining fingers on my left hand, sensing a phantom sensation where the others used to be, thinking of the guy in the basement who hadn't been afforded a second chance. "What happened to Marisol?" asked Gretchen. Gretchen had a sing-song voice. "If you met her, you'd wonder how she got involved in a life of crime. But once you got to know her, it all made sense. She was capable of unhinged cruelty. But when she wasn't mad, she was downright pleasant, which is why she had risen so high in the boss's ranks. From a human resources perspective, she was a middle management goldmine, capable of utilizing her team to full effect. I'd always sensed that Gretchen was trying to prove herself. For a woman in the modern working world, I'd always heard it's a balancing act, the need to prove yourself immediately, forcefully, and without asking for permission is especially important when you consort with hardened criminals. Gretchen had been my manager for 3 years. I had worked for the boss ever since he decided to pull me back from the brink of death and enlisted me in his workforce. "Marisol was kidnapped," said the boss, "last night. I'm still waiting the ransom call." Gretchen. Excuse me. Gretchen nodded to the butcher, who, with his massive vice-like mitts, pulled out a notepad and began jotting down the details. He wrote in elegant loops and swirls, delicate handwriting that stood in contrast to his Hulk-like build. "How'd they get to her?" asked Mike. 3 down there. They've never fucked up until now." Mike was a former Marine, just like me, a veteran of wars in the Middle East. He had a direct way about him. For years, he'd taken orders, but the boss had given him more independence, and he owned it. He was a natural hunter, as good as shaking down details as anyone I'd ever met. "Security was tight," I added. "Whoever's behind it knew what they were doing." The boss nodded. "They stole Marisol right from under the men's noses, like phantoms. I wonder, had those men paid more attention, would we be dealing with this? I only hire the best, but there's been oversight on my part." The boss was the most organized person I had ever met. His recruitment process was rigorous and intentional. He had a deep bench, which gave him the time to find perfectly vetted replacements in the event he had to retire employees. The boss loved his daughter fiercely. He smothered her with intense, dangerous devotion. Marisol was an only child. She was 2 years younger than me. She also happened to be the love of my life, which is why the boss tortured me on that abandoned beach 3 years before. I'd come back from Afghanistan to a country that did jack shit to support veterans, and of all the things I did when I got home, petty crime, too much heroin, wallowing in depression, you name it, courting Marisol was the highlight. She made me feel like living life was worth the damn. She saved my soul just by looking in my direction. I never knew Marisol's dad was a crime lord. We did normal relationship stuff when we first met. Got pizza, took trips to amusement parks during the summer times, did the works. The farther I fell in love with Marisol, the farther away the horrors of war and the depths of my drug addiction became. But when the boss found out she was dating a gringo grunt with a bad background, he intervened. They take me to a beach in the middle of the night. They beat the shit out of me to the point where I could barely see through the swelling slits of my eyes. They cut off my pinky finger. I didn't even wince. When they cut off my ring finger, the one encircled by the promise ring Marisol made me wear, a promise that we would get married and run away together when the time was right. One of the boss's guards threw the finger, still wearing the ring, into the ocean. Then he covered my head with a plastic bag and zip-tied it. It was the boss's preferred method of execution. As I listened to the rhythmic waves and the boss's discussion with his guards through sound-muffling plastic, I reflected on the hope Marisol had given me. All the horrors I'd seen came into perspective, small blips in the radar of my life, overshowered by Marisol's abundant love. I remember it well, the feeling of accepting my death, knowing that the last several months of being with Marisol had been worth it, that the bad stuff, even for a fleeting second, had gone away. After another 30 seconds, my vision fading away, a faraway light beckoning me toward it. Someone had ripped off the plastic bag. It was the boss. The guy who ordered my death and then saved my life. I remember his words clearly, as if he had spoken them yesterday. I want you to work for me. But if you ever talk to my daughter again, I will fucking kill you. The rest was history, including my relationship with Marisol. That was the boss's one condition. My life in exchange for denying myself of his daughter. I hated the boss. But strangely, I loved him too. He was the person who brought Marisol into the world. Though no one but me knew it, I carried out orders because somewhere in the deepest part of myself, I imagined being with Marisol again one day. I snapped back to the present. Butcher took more notes as Boss relayed what he remembered, delicately chewing his breakfast and wiping the corners of his mouth after each bite. Midnight. Last night, said the boss. From her apartment, yeah? Asked Mike. Yes, replied the boss. They said that she was there one moment, gone the next. I took a deep breath and asked what no one else wanted to. It's connected to the other disappearances, isn't it? The boss began to cry, a light sob, a flutter of breath as he fought against the tears. Yes. The mark? Asked Mike. It was there? Yes. The boss stood up and made his way toward the back door. Please, finish filling them in, he said, looking at one of his bodyguards. I need to check on Philippa. The bodyguard took the boss's seat and pulled out his own notepad. It was covered in damp smears of blood, which I assumed were from the men in the basement. Midnight, he said, almost on the dot. From Marisol's apartment and the mark, a pentagram written in Marisol's blood on the wall. I thought of asking how they knew it was Marisol's blood, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that 100% of the people who'd gone missing, thanks to those who left the bloody pentagram signature, were never found again. "We can't go to the cops for obvious reasons," said the bodyguard. "But the idea that the first 72 hours are crucial, the only ones that matter, that's what we're going on." Another of the boss's bodyguards added, "Remember hearing somewhere he used to be a cop? After 3 days, we're fucked," he said. I looked at my watch. 9:15 a.m. "Okay, 62 hours and change," I said. "All right, let's get moving. What else do we have to work off?" The bodyguard motioned to the boss's wife's garden shed. "The guy in there," he said, "our only hope." "Who is it?" "He escaped from the hovel." "Bullshit! No one has." The hovel, well, it was the name of the slaughterhouse no one had seen. The place where the pentagram tracing motherfuckers responsible for Marisol's disappearance took their victims. "Well, apparently he did," said the bodyguard, the one who used to be a cop. "That's what my guys on the inside said." He nodded in the direction of the shed. "That guy was in witness protection up until a few hours ago. It worked some favors. We got him on retainer till Marisol's 72 hours are up." Mike stood. "All right, let's do it then. I don't want to be the one to tell boss that Marisol's gone forever." We made our way to the shed and went inside. The man sitting on a chair, well, he wasn't tied to it, nor had he been tortured. His face was perfectly intact, all fingers accounted for. There were 4 chairs, one for Gretchen, Butcher, Mike, and myself. We sat down. I studied the guy's demeanor, and the first thing I noticed was how calm he was. Despite being in the shed at a crime lord's estate, he wasn't shaken in the slightest. He had a zen way about him, fearless, like he'd already accepted whatever fate the universe brought his way. "Tom Parkins," he said, sticking out his hand. "Good to meet you all. Happy to be here. Happy to help." "Are you?" asked Butcher. Butcher rarely talked, and when he did, it came out as a sound somewhere between the scale between a caveman's grunt and a mongrel's bark. "I am, believe it or not," said Tom. "Maybe talking to you all, maybe it does some good." I thought of telling the guy about all the people I'd seen in his position before. Even if they gave us the information we wanted, they usually ended up in a grave, sprinkled with lime and left to fertilize the earth. "I can see inside your head, you know," said Tom. "What do you mean?" "I don't think your boss plans to kill me," he said. "Or at least he hasn't thought about it yet. He's too hung up on his daughter. Rightfully so." "How'd you know I was thinking that?" I asked. "My time in the hovel," Tom said. It's a strange place, like a gateway of sorts, to hell or wherever the evils of our world congregate, a black hole maybe. But ever since I left, I can read minds, among other things." "Bullshit," I thought. "Not bullshit," Tom said. "I'm not lying to you. I've got no reason to. Let's get started. Time's running out." He looked at his watch. "By my count, we have a little over 62 hours until we can count Marisol gone as forever. But in all honesty, the hovel and the people who run it don't play by worldly rules. I wouldn't be surprised if Marisol's dead already, or at least beyond saving. Still, doesn't hurt to try." "All right, then," I said. "How can you help us?" "By getting you inside that hovel," Tom said. "By relaying the details of my experience there. Maybe I can prepare you. all before going inside, which I already surmise is what you're planning to do. I think I can help you find it, too." "Okay, then," said Gretchen. "You have 1 hour. Then we're moving out." "I won't need more than that," said Tom. Gretchen nodded to Butcher, who took out his notepad and prepared to jot down the details. "I arrived at the hovel about a year ago," said Tom. "I'd been finishing up on a shift at my restaurant. After things cooled off for the night, I went in the back alley to smoke. I noticed a man standing there. Well, average height, average weight. He was wearing blue jeans and a black sweatshirt, the hood pulled up over his head. Even when someone wears a hood, you can usually make out their face, but well, his face was a shadow, devoid of features." "What do you mean, devoid of features?" asked Mike. You know those classic images of the Grim Reaper?" Tom asked. "Hood pulled up, face invisible. Almost as though we just couldn't comprehend it, even if we wanted to." I nodded. "I've seen the look a dozen times. Comics, movies, wherever else death showed up. That's what it's like," said Tom. "The man was dressed ordinarily, but his face, I believe if I'd seen it, I would have lost my mind in an instant. Under the hood was a secret an ordinary person like me couldn't comprehend, even if I spent a lifetime trying." "All right," said Gretchen. "What else?" "Well, a figure sort of floated forward," continued Tom. "Then he placed his index finger in the center of my forehead. With a sharp fingernail, he traced a symbol. I immediately fell to the ground, paralyzed. My consciousness faded quickly, but I saw the figure. He went to the wall near where I'd been smoking, and he traced the symbol there, too." "The pentagram," I said. "Yes," said Tom. "That's what they trace on our forehead. Then they use the blood to trace it wherever they take us from." "Go on," said Gretchen. "Well, the next bit is it's a bit blurry," said Tom. "I was in the trunk of a car, unaware of my surroundings. Eventually, we came to a stop, and the hooded figure pulled me out. I was still paralyzed, unable to move on my own, but I found myself walking forward. Like a puppet," clarified Tom, noticing our confusion. "It was like the hooded figure was pulling invisible strings. I was a marionette, my arms, legs moving on their own, carrying me forward even though I was using every muscle in my body to fight back. I was also mute. Though I wanted to scream, somehow I'd lost the ability. It felt like my mouth was stitched shut." As Tom's story paused and he collected himself, I found myself glad that the boss was there to listen. He didn't have much patience for stuff that misaligned with his view of the world. Fantastical stuff, strange happenings. It wouldn't have gone over well. The boss didn't like shit you couldn't fix by covering it in plastic and forgetting it ever happened. Tom's story was strange. I had a hard time believing it, but he told it convincingly, and the sweat dripping down his face made me realize that it was true. Fear tells its own story. It overrides the best of poker faces. If you're truly scared, it's impossible to hold your cards. You play with an open hand. "All right," I said. "Tell us about the hovel." Tom drew a deep breath. "Have you ever seen Howl's Moving Castle?" "Miyazaki?" said the butcher. "Mia what?" "Hayao Miyazaki," added Tom. "He's a Japanese animator. If you don't get the reference, you don't get the reference. Just think of it this way. The hovel is a haunted house on wheels. A crawling thing. It's alive. But it's a house, I said. Right, Tom replied. A house. I think the only way we can understand it is sort of like seeing the true face of the hooded man. If we saw the hovel for what it was, the actual thing, I think we'd go crazy. So our brains spare us, and we imagine it as a house, but it moves, it crawls, and it constantly changes its location. And that's why no one can find it, I said. I went along with his story. I had my doubts. Who wouldn't? But somewhere in the mess of details was a lead about how to save Marisol. The hovel never stops moving, Tom replied. It has no address. It can't be located with a map. It exists in many places at many times. Sort of a gate, as I said earlier. A black hole leading to hell. Something worse. The hovel's strange energy pulled me toward it. I kept walking forward with jagged marionette movements. The man in the hood walked beside me. The energy of the place was magnetic. We got inside, continued Tom, and the first thing I noticed was it was somewhat normal, welcoming even, a normal house, an old house, but a place your grandmother might live. When we got inside, the hooded man led me forward. He showed me a room, then he closed the door. What was in the room? Asked Mike. My worst fears, said Tom. It was a sort of amusement exhibit. That's the best way I could describe it. Imagine paying the price of admission to the Museum of Natural History. Except in the case of the hovel, it's a museum of all the things you fear. I don't follow, said Gretchen. Fire, for example, Tom replied. In the room, I saw the charred corpse of my mother in the corner. Blackened chunks of her skin were peeling off like they were in the night she died. Her beautiful hair had been reduced to molten rubble. She looked just like she did when I found her when I was a young boy. She'd been smoking a cigarette in bed, a bottle of gin next to her. She passed out and burned to death. The bedroom in our apartment was filled with flames, but I escaped. They managed to put out the fire before the building burned down, but my mom and 10 others died. Tom looked at us, realized we didn't quite grasp what he was saying. The hovel manifests your worst fears, he continued. It forces you to relive your nightmares. I saw other things, too. My father holding a belt slicked with my blood. My ex-wife telling me I was a failure, that I never amount to anything but a line cook. I had overwhelming visions of loneliness, of me as an old man without a partner, staring at a screen and eating a TV dinner, watching a show about people who were happier than I was. The hovel manifests all of your fears, said Tom. It puts them in one place, in one room. The visceral, violent fears as well as the psychological ones. The place was sort of an all-seeing eye. Nothing is hidden from the hovel. Nothing is hidden from the deranged researchers who run it. And the building, though it looked normal at first, once I was led into my room, all I heard was screaming. In each of the other rooms, the people who'd been abducted were being tortured as well, all confined in a small space with things from the depths of their worst nightmares. Tom took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. They bring people to the hovel to study them, he finished. It's a study of fear. Who are they? Asked Gretchen. I believe that they are a species from someplace else, said Tom. Not Earth. Aliens? I'm not sure. Devils? Maybe. But they're certainly not humans. They're puppeteers. They take people to the hovel, confine them in a room with their worst fears, and study the outcome. And then, once people crumble under the weight of their insanity, the puppeteers dispose of their body. Fuel. The furnaces beneath it, stoked with human refuse, keeps the place moving. So how'd you escape? Asked Mike. Somehow I survived exposure to my fears, said Tom. And so they made me a furnace keeper. My job was to shovel the insanity-ridden husks into the furnaces. Dozens of them. Once people, now empty sacks of flesh. But I was also allowed to roam freely throughout the place when I wasn't busy stoking the flames. Even though I'd been terrified of fire before, the puppeteers had liberated me from it. I only feared the puppeteers and what would happen if I disobeyed them. Eventually, purified of my own fears, that they let me go. They had no use for me. But wandering the halls, continued Tom, I saw things that made my own fears look tame by comparison. Women stuck in a room watching their unborn children die over and over, umbilical cords wrapped around their necks like snakes. Men whose partners died of AIDS, forced to watch as Kaposi sarcoma covered their lovers' bodies like leeches, sucking the life out of them in real time. Little girls, little boys huddling in a corner as their rapist step-parents crept toward them with hungry eyes and grasping hands. There were kids? Asked Mike. Yes, said Tom. Too many of them. Children in their innocence are the most fearful. Before the world scars them to the point of forgetting about their trauma, children experience true fear. Fear of the world. The potent kind of fear that comes from when you realize that everything will not be okay. It's a nutrient-rich fear, and the puppeteers feast on it. I found myself wondering why Marisol ended up there. 'Cause she has a fear that the puppeteers found useful, said Tom, reading my thoughts. Marisol fears something unique, something they hadn't analyzed yet. Who knows what it is, but that's my hypothesis for why the puppeteers bring different people there. It's not random selection. They targeted Marisol because of the way her fear tastes. I felt a sudden hatred for Tom well up. The way he talked about fear like it was a delicacy. He had a laissez-faire attitude. I didn't like it, especially in this case. It was directed at Marisol. I agreed to the boss's demands that I never talk to Marisol again in exchange for my life, but I still loved her. I always had. When I snapped out of my thoughts, I noticed that Tom was staring at me, searching my eyes. How far will you go for love, Charlie? He asked. He didn't know my name. No one had said it, and I sure as shit hadn't told him. I know a lot more than you think, said Tom, reading my mind again. Having survived the hovel, my mind has opened in a new, wonderful ways. I see a different kind of darkness in you. There is war in your eyes. Self-hatred, too. Self-loathing. My patience was wearing thin. My nerves began to fray. You still love Marisol, he said, and you hate yourself for ignoring it. That love, combined with your self-hatred, it bleeds out of you. Even though you can't see it. Even though you think the shell you created protects you from the world. Painful memories were being dragged up. The pain of the past. Over time, I had made myself forget about what I had had with Marisol. I made myself forget that once upon a time she pulled me away from the darkness. Oh, is there hatred? Tom continued. Hatred for Marisol's father, your boss. Even though you think it's well hidden, and now the puppeteers have her. I wonder if your boss had allowed you and Marisol to be together, could you have protected her? He smiled. The puppeteers would love you, Charlie, he said. Rage, terror, something special. Your fear would be like a feast fit for a king. I launched myself across the table, grabbing Tom by the collar and yanking him forward. Gretchen and Mike sprung up as well, pulling me off. You're fucking dead man, I said. Dead man walking. You've given us nothing to go on. You think the boss is going to spare your sorry ass? Tom chuckled to himself. I've given you everything. You just don't see it yet. What the fuck are you talking about? Yelled Mike. He looked ready to kill too. We don't have any more time for your games. I've told you how to find the hovel, said Tom. You just haven't been listening. So listen to me now. By accepting your fears, by embracing them, you can offer yourself to the hovel, to the puppeteers. And I believe that by doing so, you'll see it. You'll find it. If you hurry, you just might be able to save Marisol too. Tom did something then that made my guts fall through the pit of my stomach. He pulled something out of his pocket. Looking closely, I saw it was my severed ring finger, somehow perfectly preserved, still jacketed in the promise ring Marisol had bought me all those years ago. It was impossible. The boss's guards had thrown it into the ocean the night they tortured me on the beach 3 years earlier. It was fucking crab food. Nothing's impossible, Charlie, said Tom. That's what I learned in the hovel. Things beyond your wildest dreams, your most depraved nightmares. It's all very possible. Will survival be possible for Marisol? Who's to say? For whatever reason, I was able to withstand my nightmares, but to my knowledge, no one else has. He looked at me with his strange, haunted eyes. Like I said, Charlie, there's a different kind of darkness in you. You're very special. Hatred for the boss. Yes, he said. And hatred for myself. Yes! And hatred for the whole fucking world. Now we're getting somewhere, Tom finished. But there's love, too. For Marisol, I said. In front of the 3 other people who could have told the boss I had admitted to what had been forbidden. Loving Marisol. But in the same time, I realized that's why the boss had chosen me to interrogate Tom. He knew I'd do anything for Marisol, that I'd even die for her. I was the perfect man for the job. He was using me, just like he had been since that night on the beach when he decided to let me live. How far would you go for love, Charlie? Tom asked. Would you kill for love? Would you die for it? If you submitted to eternal torture in the hovel, but Marisol survived, would it be worth it? thought of the things I feared. Killing innocents, shooting up too much heroin, willing myself to overdose, but somehow being pulled back from the brink. I thought of my fear of losing Marisol, and it pressed in on me, starving me of oxygen. Mike steadied me before I fell off my chair. "I'll lead you to the hovel," said Tom. "But Charlie, you have to commit to facing your fears, or we'll never find it. Simply acknowledging won't do. No. All of you need to dive in head first." For all the terror I felt in that moment, being looked into by a complete stranger, my hand laid down for the world to see. I trusted him. Trusting him meant saving Marisol. 61 hours left, said Tom, looking down at his watch. "If you want to save her, we should move." The boss gave us permission to mobilize. Thankfully, Gretchen and the others didn't mention what Tom had revealed about my love for Marisol and my true feelings toward the boss. They covered my ass. And we were a team, and saving Marisol meant sticking together. An hour later, driving in 2 cars, we left. Several of the boss's soldiers came with us. One of the drivers took the directions that Tom gave him. Tom had a compass for their place. No map led to the hovel, but it left an imprint on him, and he led us there by memory. Night fell. We drove into the woods, into the depths of darkness I didn't know existed. The closer we got, the darker things came. And then I saw it. A normal-looking 3-story house, just like Tom had said. Lights shone out of its windows like eyes. We got out of the cars. We loaded our guns, put on tactical vests, and packed everything that we needed for Marisol's extraction. "Doesn't look like Howell's moving castle to me," said Butcher. "It's just a house," Gretchen added. "Have you seen your car recently?" Tom asked. When I looked, I saw that the 2 cars and the drivers who'd stayed behind with them were 100 yards away, but we'd been standing still. "Black hole," said Tom, "like I told you earlier." I was a Marine. I'd been in dozens of firefights, clawing tooth and nail for survival behind enemy lines. I'd killed dozens of people. I stared death in the face. The horrors I'd experienced were enough for 10 lifetimes. But there was something different about this. The hovel looked like any other house, but at the same time, it was the embodiment of evil. It was a vortex of darkness. Impossible to describe, impossible to ignore, and impossible to ever forget. With dread creeping up inside me, I slid down my night vision goggles. Scanning the environment, moving forward in the tactical formation with the others, we made our way toward the hovel. The lights inside beckoned to us. Moths drawn to a candle flame. That was the end of part 1. Have a moment to have a drink, and then we will start part 2. So it looks like all I'm seeing is Pyro is hanging out. Is anybody else hanging out with us tonight? Probably just Pyro. Either way, good to see you. Glad to see you here with us. Hope you're enjoying the story thus far. We'll get started with part 2 momentarily. We approached the hovel in 3x3 formation. Mike's in the lead with his silenced MP5. He's flanked by 2 more of Boss's grunts, equipped with the same. Gretchen and me bring up the rear, sweeping the darkness with our Mark 23s. Butcher holds the line with his trusty assault shotgun, perfect for crowd control. Tom is right on my ass, right where I told him to stay. As we get closer to the hovel, I hear his breathing quicken. I scan the environment through my night vision goggles, a lying green veil silhouetting trees and human shapes. I see 4 furnace keepers who've been assigned to patrol the area outside the hovel. Their eyes light up and go wide in the split second before they realize death has arrived. We move with decisive, violent coordination, quickly taking them out. I see 2 puppeteers nearer to the hovel, hooded wraiths who float in the darkness. One of the grunts raises his SMG, pointing it in their direction, but Mike reaches over and pushes down the barrel. "Quiet," he whispers. "Don't take shots. We don't need to." The path to the hovel is clear now. The furnace keepers we've dispatched lay down for good. Their body is beginning to cool. Tom pulls us behind a tree. I see the puppeteers go inside the hovel. The door closes behind them. "Your fears," says Tom. "Embrace them." "Fears?" asks one of the grunts. "Embrace them? What the fuck are you talking about?" Tom motions to the hovel. In the few seconds we stop to huddle, it's moved 50 yards away as though pulled out by the ocean tide. "We're gonna keep chasing it, unless you dive head first into what scares you," Tom says. Think about your fears. Visualize them. That hovel, we need to make it hungry." As batshit crazy as it sounds, I think of Marisol. She's somewhere inside the place, a victim to whatever agonies those hooded fucks have dreamed up. "Do it," I say. "Right now, all of you, just do it." Mike, Gretchen, and Butcher lower their heads as if in prayer. The grunts look at one another, shrug, and then do the same. I follow suit, closing my eyes and thinking about the horrors of my life. I think about the sun-blasted deserts of blood seeping into the earth. I think of motherless children crying and cursing the white devils who'd use them as private target practice. I think of cotton fever rubbing up and down my arms, track marks perched on veins so overused they're practically fossilized. And I think of Marisol, hurt, harmed, or something much worse. Under the weight of it all, I shudder. When I open my eyes, the hovel is closer. It's as though it's floating on a wave, and whatever god living beneath the ocean's surface has shoved it towards us. The front door of the place swings open like a tongue reaching out, searching for something to taste. On the other side of it, I see a homey, lamp-lit entryway. "Let's go," says Tom. We continue in our formation toward the open door. The grunts climb the steps and hug the wall, looking through the windows on either side of the doorway. Mike, Gretchen, and me form a triangle, looking inside and seeing nothing. "Butcher," says Gretchen, nodding to him. "You're on point. Move in." Gretchen is in her element, commanding our fire team with born confidence. Butcher moves through the open door, sweeping the entryway with his shotgun, looking for someone to blow in half. "Clear," he says. Then he lowers his goggles from his eyes. Gretchen leads the rest of us inside. We stopped in the foyer. Dark hallway lies ahead, so dark I can't see 15 feet down it. Twin curling staircases lead up to the second floor and then wrap around in the opposite direction, leading to the third. On our left is a large living room. On our right, a parlor with a grand piano that's been collecting dust for 100 years. "Kick up your feet and stay a while," says one of the grunts. "We need to make this quick," says Tom. It's too darn quiet. I see that his eyes have gone wide. I follow them to see where he's looking. There's no one in the house except us, but our formation is beginning to break. Mike is making his way up the curving staircase to the second floor alone. "Mike!" "Coming," he says, then continues his ascent. Gretchen and the grunts have taken off into the parlor, pulled forward by something I can't see. "What the fuck? Stop! Wait! We're right on your tail," Gretchen says, and continues leading the grunts toward another room on the parlor's opposite side. Butcher, by the time I think to look for him, I see a door at the end of the hallway swing closed. He's already gone into the basement. "The hovel," says Tom. "It's splitting us apart." "The fuck do you mean it's splitting us apart?" For the first time, for all he's talked about fear, I see what it looks like for Tom. He's pale as a wax candle. There's utter terror writ large on his face. Beads of sweat stand out on it like dewdrops. His tongue lolls around his open mouth, and he sways, panting like a dog in summertime heat. "It's," he says, "they..." I reach up and smack him across the face as hard as I can. His eyes narrows, and he looks at me. "The others," he finishes. They think they're following you. The hovel, it's controlling us." I look up to scan the entryway and then realize it isn't the entryway at all. Somehow, we've moved forward into the house. Down the dark hallway, 30 feet in the back opposite direction, the front door of the hovel swings shut. As it closes, a figure moves into view. It stands in front of the closed door like a dark sentry. Blue jeans, normal height, normal weight. The thing's face obscured by shadows. A puppeteer. It begins moving toward us. Slowly at first, and then gradually faster. I try to raise my pistol, but it's like I'm swimming in concrete. Everything is slow and sluggish, except for the puppeteer who's moving in a beeline toward us, his arms raised, reaching out. And as he comes closer, I see under the hood. I can't put words to it. It's unknowable. Were not for the cumulative horrors in my life, all the terrible things I'd already seen, I think the sight of the puppeteer's face would have driven me crazy. But I'm special, just like Tom said. I built for this, to look into the maw of hell. I pull Tom in front of me. like a shield, except I'm not using him as a shield. I'm using him as a perch for my pistol to steady my shaking hand. I empty 10 silenced rounds at the puppeteer. Somehow, due to the all-consuming silence in the hallway, that the shots echo. But the puppeteer, he's becoming an anamorphous mist. And he swirls away. My shot's going right through his body, splintering for the front doorway he's been blocking just moments before. Tom moves out of the way, pulling me with him. I see the side of his face is burned from the metal of the silencer, but he ignores any pain that's there, driven by pure instinct. He yanks me into a room on our right and closes the door behind us. It's a nondescript room in a normal house. It might have been a first-floor bedroom, but what I see inside sends a trickle of piss running down my leg. It's not real. I say, it isn't. This time it's Tom who smacks me across the face. Better believe it, it's fucking real, he yells, staring at me with his peeled, haunted eyes. This is all real, and unless you get with it, we're fucked. But my breath is clogged in my chest. At no time in my adult life had been this scared. Botched hit jobs, firefights with cops, you name it, but this trumps everything. Walking toward me from the opposite side of the room, I see an old high school friend, Graham Simmons. We've known each other since we were kids. When I went overseas to play G.I. Joe, he stayed in our hometown, wasting away with all the other people who'd done the same. When I got back, it was him who introduced me to heroin, saying that if the VA couldn't help me, he would. Grab's walking corpse is a strange hue. Gray, same color he'd been the night I found him. His body beginning to bloat. Under his stretched skin is a network of blue spider-like veins. Instead of one syringe sticking into the rotten abscess of his right arm, they're covering his body, sticking into every vein available. He's like a human pincushion. Charlie, he moans. I got some new shit, man. None of that brown garbage you boys from Afghanistan sends us. This is China white, buddy. Straight China white. Froth begins to spill from Graham's mouth, seeping out of its opposite corners like soapy tusks. There's a little something extra in it, he mumbles through the froth. Fentanyl. Shit's fucking me up good. Graham continues stumbling toward me. I know the syringes are pulsing in and out of him like living stingers torn from a honeybee's ass. Graham raises his hands. His fingers are syringes, but he has too many fingers. 100 at least. They spread out suddenly like a geisha's folding fan. I've fallen to the ground, crowd walking away quickly as I can. From the tip of each needle, opiate venom drips out. There's a sudden flash. Tom took my gun off me. I didn't even notice. I look up and see that there's a new apple-sized hole in the left side of Graham's head. Skin, bone, and hair burst outward like blooming flower petals. Going to sleep now, Charlie, says Graham, blood gouting out in the rhythm of his dying heartbeat. Nighty-night. Graham collapses. Nothing more than a pile of used sharps. Tom pulls me to my feet. "We have to keep moving," he says. He points to an open door on the opposite side of the room. On the other side, it is pure darkness. I noticed something as I stand up. My vision swaying, I see there are other windows in the room. Like a busted strobe light, they go in and out every half second. But on the other side of the windows, I see more of the puppeteers. Their hoods are pulled up, their faces concealed. They're watching us. They're watching my fears play out, just like Tom said. It's like we're in a surgery room, and they're medical students downloading knowledge about the unique terrors that make us human. "Move!" yells Tom. The pile of used sharps has risen upward, boiling in on itself. A humming cloud of mosquito-like creatures with hypodermic beaks. Tom helps me to the door, and just as he closes it, 1,000 needles plunge through. But then, the light in this new room goes on, and the plunging syringes stop plunging. And I realize that the door, there are no prick holes at all. It's made of solid wood. The horror in this new room is so much worse than the horror of seeing Graham Simmons' reanimated corpse. I'm back in Afghanistan. I'm standing in the middle of Sandy Town Square. Other soldiers from my unit are there too. They're frozen, like characters in a movie that's been paused, but they're staring at the same thing. It's a pile of bodies. A dozen Afghani school children. 3 teachers are there too, the ones who had covered the children while everyone in my unit emptied their clips, driven insane by the horrors of war. One of the little girls comes to life. Limada fietada, limada can casita jar. I don't understand a word she's saying, but it doesn't matter. I know that she's inquiring about her cruelty. Her expression tells the whole story. She and all the others look just like they did on the day that we killed them in Henman province. The girl begins crawling toward the top of the pile, reaching toward me. The little girl begins bleeding from her eyes. Her teeth turn into fangs. I can hear an inhuman growl generating deep within her chest. I pull out my other gun, my military Colt issue 45 I keep for close encounters. I point it at the little girl's head. Just as I depress the trigger, Tom shoves my hand down and a shot blasts a hole in the floor. "It's Marisol!" he yells at me. "Stop! It's Marisol!" Tom's never seen Marisol before, but he knows it's her at a glance. She's a spitting image of the boss, a stunning Latina beauty, but now she's covered in gore, and I realize that the pile she's lying in, it's not Afghani school children. It's a collection of rotting human husks, victims of the hovel and the puppeteers. "Charlie?" asks Marisol. "I'm here," I say. I used the pet name I used all those years ago. It comes back to me, forces its way out of my mouth. I'm here, Mari." I stare at the hole in the floor, inches from Mari's head, and realize how close I came to killing her. Let's get her out of here, says Tom. We have to keep moving. I notice Marisol is naked, save a ragged bra and underwear. Her body is defiled. She's been carved with strange symbols. Streaks of blood line her body. I start to take off my tactical vest, wanting to give Marisol my shirt, but Tom shakes his head. We have to go now. I realize and nod. It's just a matter of time before the room creates more horrors, hell-bent on destroying my sanity. Tom and I carry Marisol between us. Her feet drag on the floor. Then she finds them. I can walk, she says. Just keep a lookout. I nod and turn away, and she pulls me back. How'd you find me, Charlie? I don't bother to answer. I pull her forward, hugging her, kissing the top of her head. I'm taking you away from here, Maddie, I said. Let's go. Tom leads us through another door into the hallway. I have no sense for where we are in the place. The only thing that keeps me moving is my jackhammer pulse. Instinct and the desire to take Marisol away from the darkness. I look down the hallway. More of the puppeteers are floating toward us. I look down the opposite way and see the same. They're closing the distance quickly, but an open door appears in front of us suddenly. There's a staircase leading downward. On the walls, I see flickering flames. No, not the furnaces, says Tom. Please, not the furnaces. This is what Tom fears most. He's fucking terrified. Shoveling insanity-ridden corpse into the hungry furnaces is the fate from which he narrowly escaped. He turns and runs. He's quickly swept into the embrace of the puppeteers and pulled down the hall. Without stopping to think, I lead Marisol through the door to the basement and throw it closed behind us. As we get to the basement floor, I see Butcher. He's standing next to a pile of husks similar to the ones Marisol had climbed out of. His assault shotgun is leaning against the wall nearby. He's right next to the furnace, still wearing the warm puffy jacket he always does, but somehow he's shivering. She fucking left me, Charlie. Easy, Butch, I say. I notice a gas can next to him. I also notice his jacket is wet with it. His face is shiny too. He's been drinking this stuff. She left me in the cold, he says. She went into the store, never came back. Who did, Butch? I say. Come on, buddy. Come away from that fire. She never came back. Aren't you listening? I feel for Butcher. I want to help him. We've worked together for years, but all I can think about is Marisol and getting her out of the basin. Butcher takes another swig from the gas can like he's nursing a bottle of whiskey on a lonely night. I'm cold, Charlie, he says. He pukes out some of the gas. So goddamn cold. Butcher reaches toward the furnace. In it, I notice something. The severed arm of one of the husks. Butcher turns it as though it's a log on the fire. The flames come dangerously close to licking Butcher's gasoline-soaked skin. I lead Marisol back slowly. Seeing Butcher's shotgun against the wall, I grab it, just in case we'll need it. Satisfied with the amount of flames that have consumed the husk's severed arm, Butcher pulls it out. He looks back at me with sad, hopeless eyes. Goodbye, Charlie, he says. Before I can protest, Butcher takes the burning end of the husk's arm, opens his mouth, and jams it down his throat. The effect is instantaneous. The gas coating Butcher's throat. The gas is pulled in his stomach, ignites. It explodes out of him in hellish pillars, and his body is consumed in flames. The entire basement becomes a sweltering furnace in an instant. Marisol and I, near the stairs, began running up them. If we'd been any closer to Butcher, we'd be dead, but we're afforded a second chance. The wooden stairs behind us start to crumble. We scramble up the fire, eating everything in our wake. Marisol pulls me through the doorway and closes it behind us at the last second. As soon as she does, on the other side, from beneath the doorway, I feel a gush of cold air. Butcher was killed by the cold, even though he was swallowed by fire. I turn away, back to Marisol. I see we're not in a hallway at all. We're in a massive, elegant ballroom. Its walls 100 feet high. Gretchen and the two grunts she left with are lying in the middle of the room. The two grunts are clearly dead, their faces and bodies smashed beyond recognition. Gretchen's chest still rising and falling slowly. I noticed her fists. They're completely broken and the bones stick through the skin at odd, jagged angles. The walls of the room, gazing down at the blood spectacle, I see a million blinking eyes. But then I realize the eyes aren't eyes at all. They're more of a strange viewing windows. Looking out from the other side are more of the unfeeling puppeteers. I walk over to Gretchen with Marisol. "Charlie," says Gretchen. Her eyes are almost completely swollen shut. Most of her teeth have been smashed out. "Just end it, Charlie. Please. Do it for me." She draws a breath and coughs out blood. They wanted a show," she says. They wouldn't stop watching. We gave them what they came for. The eyeball-like windows covering the walls blink in unison. The world's just a gigantic fucking peep show, says Gretchen. "Will you look too, Charlie?" "Gretchen," I say, bending down to her, "please, you're not making any sense." She rolls to her side and sits up. Before I can stop her, she reaches up with each of her broken fists. It grabs her bare eyeballs and rips them out. I stand stumbling back. Marisol catches me. Gretchen stands too, walking forward, unable to see. She reaches out to me, an eyeball in each hand, and offers them. They couldn't stop watching, Charlie. And I just can't fucking look any longer. Then, under the weight of her insanity, Gretchen collapses, convulses, and dies. Another husk ready for the furnace. I begin to sob. The eyeballs covering the walls of the room turn as one to look at me. They're spectating, watching me lament the loss of a woman I'd looked up to for years, who I counted as one of my best friends. Marisol shakes me. "Charlie!" she yells. "We have to keep moving!" I nod, knowing that Gretchen would want us to escape, knowing she'd want us to finish the mission and save Marisol, if nothing else. So I turn with Marisol and run. She carries the assault shotgun. Behind us, I hear a scrabbling noise. I look back to see that Tom has descended from the top of the ballroom. Attached to his arms, his legs, and his head are strings. Marionettes strings, and overhead at the top of the ceiling I see a gigantic hand holding them. It's one of the puppeteers, as big as a demigod. Tom moves with jagged, scripted marionette movements. The strings stretch his body, which creaks in response. It's like he's being drawn and quartered, but every time he nears the breaking point, the strings relax, and he continues his strange dance. A dozen other husks fall from the ceiling, more grim puppets. "Kick your feet up and stay a while," says Tom. He's gone. Anything that made him sane and human once is long gone. Marisol leads the way, and we run. Every 5 or 10 steps, I look and take another look behind. An army of puppets flooding from the ballroom and into the hallway Marisol and I are running down. In the distance, I see a light. It's the front entryway of the hovel. Somehow we found our way back to it, but the human puppets behind us are catching up. They're tumbling down the hallway, strings tangled up, ripping and strangling and tearing, but moving forward in a wave of body parts with Tom in the lead. When we arrive at the front entryway, the puppets dangerously close behind us, I see a familiar figure. It's Mike. "Get the fuck down!" he yells. Marisol drops, sliding across the wood floor, and I follow suit. And with twin SMGs, his own and one taken from one of the grunts, Mike opens fires. The suppressors muffle the sound for a moment, then break. There's an explosion of gunfire. I hear the sound of flesh disintegrating behind us. The puppets screaming in agony. Mike keeps firing. Then he turns to us and yells, "Move! Now!" Mike's alive! God damn it, Mike's alive! We tumble down the front steps, and the mouth of the hovel closes behind us. Falling to the ground in the forest we made our way through hours earlier, I look back. Staring out of the hovel's windows, its eyes, I see dozens of puppeteers. Their hoods are drawn, their faces are shadows, but they watch and they observe. Then the hovel lurches up, and in a split second it launches away into the darkness, its foundation creaking, trees being blown over like matchsticks in its wake. I close my eyes. When I open them, it's just me, Mike, and Marisol in the forest. Marisol is naked, but save for the bra and underwear that look ready to disintegrate and fall off her body. I'm cradling her in my arms. There are 2 cars, the 2 we drove from the boss's estate. Their drivers are staring at us like they have no fucking clue what just happened. They don't. Another car pulls up into view, a large, black-windowed SUV. The doors fling open. The boss's bodyguards pour out, and then the boss himself. "Marisol!" He runs over. She fights her way out, and my arms begin crawling back in the direction the hovel just went. I realized then that Marisol fears her father. "Stay away from me," she says. "My soul," says the boss, staring at her naked body. What have they done to you? He looks at me. You! He says. His bodyguards rush over and lift me to my feet. Mike has made his way over to Marisol, shielding her and realizing I'm at my expiration date, and the least he can do is help Marisol. You fucking gringo pig, he says. It's time to say goodbye. The great defiler, the thief of my Marisol's innocence. You're responsible. No plastic bag this time. Boss reaches down and unsheaths a Bowie knife bigger than anything I'd ever seen. It's a fucking broadsword. The boss puts the blade at my throat, measuring his strike. I should have done this 3 years ago, he says. Say goodbye, Charles. He cocks back his arm. I accept my death. Tom said he saw a different kind of darkness in me, and he was right. There's something unsolvable, unfixable inside. I barely understand it myself, but saving Marisol has lifted me. In death, I'll find peace, knowing I gave her life. There's a sudden, massive eruption and a flash of light that cuts through the darkness of the forest. I blink. Then I notice that the boss's head is gone. Marisol is standing nearby, holding Butcher's assault shotgun, having just blown off her father's head. The bodyguards are frozen, struggling to make sense of what just happened. Marisol walks forward as her father's corpse slumps to the ground and spits on him. The bodyguards gain their senses and begin to draw their guns, but Mike is quicker. He's already loaded a clip, and with an assassin's efficiency, he takes them all out. The 3 guards and the 2 drivers, dead in an instant. I see that Marisol is still staring at her father's corpse, but her expression has lightened. Her actions have removed a yoke from her shoulders. I doubt I'll ever understand why Marisol feared her father, why she hated him, but I'm smart enough to connect the dots. He loved her. A dangerous love. And she put an end to it without a second thought. We have to go, says Mike. There be more. He helps me to the car. Marisol comes in behind me. When we get to the car, I strip off my vest. I remove my sweat-soaked shirt like I'd wanted to earlier and put it over Marisol's head. I'm bigger than she is. It's large enough that it's basically a dress, covering her and giving her the privacy the puppeteers in the hovel stole away. I sit in the back seat with her, cradling her head on my shoulder, and she begins to cry. Mike puts the car in drive. Where to? He asks. Anywhere but here, I say. We drive. The forest thins and we reach a highway. The massive lights poking the darkness in intervals of 20 yards pass at a blur. I look down to see Marisol has fallen asleep, afforded comfort after all the horror. Mike turns on the radio. Some song I don't recognize. I start to drift away, but before I sleep, I reflect on what happened. Encountering my worst fears, recognizing them. In a way, my short time in the hovel had been a blessing. Past the carnage, there was catharsis. A different kind of darkness, bathed in sudden light. that was the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. It's definitely well written. I must say, we will have to make this author a part of our family here in the asylum. Now, I know I had planned to do quite a few more stories this evening. Unfortunately, I'm having some difficulties at this moment with my back. I wanted to make sure I finished the story because I did not want to leave it cut off before the end. So I'm going to cut a little early tonight. I did think it was going to be a little shorter, but I do apologize that it was far shorter. Again, this story was written by Cal Ness. Now, for all my other authors who I have gotten stories from, I will just read these on Wednesday, the next stream, be at the same time as tonight. So do not worry, these stories will be ready for you to listen on Wednesday. I do apologize that this time was shortened. Unfortunately, got to take care of some back issues before I get stuck in the chair. So you have a wonderful evening. If you have missed any part of our stories this evening, well, story, I keep in mind I do keep all of the previous streams up and available to be listened at any time. So if you enjoyed the stream, you enjoyed the story, please let your friends, family know about it. Invite them to the asylum so they can be a part of us. A part of our psychosis? I don't know if that's the right word. Well, part of us at least. Part of the visiting hours of some sort. We can make them join us. Either you can admit them if they need to be. It all depends on the severity of the mental state, but we can help. Maybe. Either way, if you want to continue participating in listening to stories in the future, I do try to make sure these stories are put out twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays. They are live streams, no music other than the intro and outro, and at this time no sound effects. I hope in the near future to be able to provide far more entertaining videos, so keep in mind that it will come. It's just going to take a little time. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. I am Beyond 5150, and visiting hours are now over.